Welcome to Ministry in Motion, where we explore best practices for your ministry in the 21st century. We're delighted that you've joined us today. My name's Anthony Kent, and whether you're a pastor, an elder, or a congregational leader, Ministry in Motion is for you. Our guest today is Gary Krause. Gary, welcome.
Thank you.
And the topic that we want to explore with you today, Gary, is creativity in ministry.
Good.
Okay. So why is creativity important, Gary?
Well, we serve a God who is a creator, and everything he does is creative. And so if we are going to do ministry in his name, it has to reflect his creativity, and he deserves our best. Something that's bland, pedestrian, just maintaining, not good enough. We need to represent God the best way we can.
That's a fantastic point. And it sounds as though you've gone immediately for biblical reasons, which is an outstanding idea. What are some other biblical reasons why we should have creativity in our ministry?
Well, you know, if you read the Bible, it's not just a list of facts and propositions. In fact, you can sing your way through much of it. There's poetry, there's song, there's prophecy, there's stories, there's parables. And so the Bible itself is just alive with creative expression. But then you look at examples of people such as Nathan the prophet. When King Saul committed his horrendous sin.
King David.
I just say King Saul did, but I'm thinking King David, horrendous sin, murder, adultery. Nathan didn't just come along and say, these are the sins you've created. No, he told a story. He told a story about a man who killed an innocent little lamb that belonged to a poor man, etc., etc., and he got David all upset and in tears, and this man should be killed. And then Nathan just said, you are the man. I mean, just a beautiful way of hitting him right where, and Jesus did the same thing.
Exactly.
In his parables. We're told that Jesus never spoke without telling a story. And he did that because he sneaked truth in the back door and made the impact.
Yeah, and even the recorders of the gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, the way that they creatively capture the story of Jesus.
Yeah.
It's done in a wonderful way, the whole concept of the genre of literature.
Exactly. We have 4 Gospels. Why not just one? Well, 4 give us different angles and perspectives.
Exactly. And the Apostle Paul, do you see him as being creative as well?
Yeah, I mean, the Apostle Paul, he even said, I become all things to all people so that I can win one. Now, he's not talking about compromise. What he's talking about, he creatively adapts to his audience. Now, he doesn't do that by watering down the message. He does it by creating the message in terms that people will understand and appreciate and that will be attractive to them. And so when he gets up on Mars Hill, he stands up there in front of the pagan philosophers. He doesn't read to them from the Bible.
Yeah.
They don't believe it. So he starts off by, first of all, saying, I was a tourist in your city today. These are the things I saw. If I had a camera, I would have taken pictures, and I saw an altar to the unknown God, and then he builds from there creatively. He even goes so far as to reach into pagan literature and quote pagan poets, not because he was a great fan of pagan poets, but he wanted to connect these people to truth.
Yeah, exactly. And he also, when you look at that passage there in the book of Acts, not only does he bring in secular or pagan authors, but he intersperses that with the occasional biblical text as well.
Right.
So it's not just paganism in isolation, is it?
But exactly. But he brings in the scriptural, not as scripture as an authority, but here's something you might be interested in, and he'll build on that authority with them later.
Exactly, yeah. Now there's some other key Bible characters as well. I'm thinking of Daniel, and I'm also thinking of the last book in the New Testament, the book of Revelation. Do you see too much creativity there?
Well, as Adventists, we tend to take it for granted. But when you look at the beasts of Revelation and Daniel, I mean, these are creative figures, lions and wings and all sorts of things happening.
Yeah, and they all tell a remarkable story,
Yeah.
and certainly capture people's attention.
And stories are important.
They really are.
And particularly today, Anthony, when we're looking at a growing postmodern population, story is so important to them, not just a list of propositions, but tell me your story.
Yeah. Now, Gary, as well as making things creative, How do we make it stick? How do we make this stay in people's attention and their mind?
Yeah. There are two brothers, Chip and Dan Heath. One is an educator, one is into economics, finance, etc. And they wrote a book, I can't remember the exact title, but I think it was called Made to Stick. And they did some extensive research on what makes an idea memorable. Why does people, and one of the things they did was they did a survey of hundreds of urban myths, you know, the kidney harvesting stories, etc., etc. And why do these urban myths stick? And they, at the end of their research, they came up with some key components of something that will stick. One is it has to be simple. It has to be unexpected. It has to be concrete, nothing abstract. It has to be concrete. It has to be credible. It has to be emotional. And it has to be a story. And if you put those together, it's success. It has to be a story. And when you look at something like Jesus' story of the prodigal son, where he's illustrating the concept of salvation and God's acceptance, it's simple. There's unexpected elements in it.
Oh, yeah.
It's a concrete story. It's a credible story. People could relate to it. It's emotional, and it is a story. I mean, there it is. And even today, people who are unbelievers, come from no Christian background, you say something like the prodigal son, they know the basics of it. It's stuck.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It is a well-known story. So let's just recap those, because we want to really capture these important things. Those 5 points again, just run them by us.
Okay, number one, simple.
Right.
Yes, for simple. You know, don't get too complicated here. Two, there has to be something unexpected, like
Right.
Nathan the prophet. David is thinking someone else, you are the man, unexpected.
Yeah.
Concrete, it has to be some tangible thing, not just out there in the abstract.
Right.
Abstract. It has to be credible. It's not just something out there in fantasy land.
And believable.
Yeah, it's believable. Then it has to be something that's emotional, something that will touch the heart, not just the head.
Yeah.
And then the other factor is it needs to be a story. And I mean, Jesus told us that. I mean, Jesus demonstrated that.
Yeah.
But so often we're tempted to get up there and list the facts and the propositions, but often the gospel story is told gospel story.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And the gospel story is the story of a man, and a man who changed the world.
Exactly.
Created the world and then recreated it in a sense.
Exactly.
Yeah. Creativity in ministry, such an important theme, such an important topic that we're exploring today in Ministry in Motion. We'll be right back straight after this break with more. Welcome back to Ministry in Motion, where our topic is creativity in ministry. Our guest today is Gary Krause, and so far we've looked at why creativity in ministry is important, biblical reasons for creativity, and also how to make creative ideas stick. Gary, in this module of our program, we'd like to explore historical examples, because we've got a long history in Christianity of how people have been creative in the past. Can you share with us some examples, please?
Yeah, I think as we go right back to the New Testament, you know, we've seen the Apostle Paul taking the truth that he'd learned from Jesus and applying it in circumstances where he was talking to Jewish people, pagans, showed creativity. You know, as we come down through the centuries, we see things like John Bunyan, who wrote the book Pilgrim's Progress, of two pilgrims making their way through to the celestial city, and they had to go through Vanity Fair, and even today the words Vanity Fair resonate with people for different reasons, but here was an allegory of the Christian life done in a creative way to appeal to people who were reading it.
Yeah, something that really captures the emotion, stays in people's memories. Yeah.
I mean, some people could have said, all we need is the Bible.
Yeah.
Why do we need the Pilgrim's Progress?
Yeah. And even looking at the printing process itself,
Yeah.
Johann Gutenberg,
Yes.
As we know, the printing press and the first material published with a movable type was the Bible. So a creative way of distributing and sharing the Bible.
And within the Seventh-day Adventist Church's tradition, it's interesting you should mention printing, because in 1849, a young Adventist pastor by the name of James White started publishing a magazine called Present Truth. He put all his energies into it, his finances, invested his life into it. Started in the spring of 1849, but by the time winter had come, he was depressed. He'd stopped printing, and one of the main reasons was one of the senior Adventist pastors, a senior pioneer, a good man by the name of Joseph Bates, had pushed down on it, had said, you need to be putting your energies into something that is more worthwhile. You should be doing direct evangelism, not wasting your time with this newfangled magazine publishing.
Ouch.
And so James White got discouraged. Joseph Bates would not even write for the publication.
Really?
Well, he happened to be married, James White, to a young woman who was fairly influential within the Adventist church. And she had some words to say, I believe, to Joseph Bates. And so by spring of the next year, he was publishing again. And as we know, Adventist publishing has just gone from strength to strength and has impacted so much. But here was an example of a young person trying a creative way of doing things, getting some pushback on it, but continued on, and God blessed. And it's interesting, his wife, some years later, back when she was in her 70s, wrote these lines. She said, God would have creative methods used, break in upon the people, surprise them.
Wow.
And as Adventists, we see this rich tradition of where she encouraged creativity in mission. She was always talking about, we need new methods. We don't need to compromise the truth, but we need new and creative methods.
Yeah. So there's obviously that long history. What are some of the risks involved, though, when you are creative, Gary? Like, there is an element of risk because invariably there will be people who are opposed to it. What are some ways that a person who is creative can navigate through those risks?
Right. Well, the number one risk is it's not going to work.
Okay, that's the challenge, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
And but I see that as a positive thing because we've learned that it doesn't work. You know, and unless we try, we don't know. And then the other thing is, it can be discouraging if you have people who say, no, we've never done that way before. Just preach the word or whatever. And so when you're navigating it, and the challenge is that usually the young creative person is not the person who is gifted in diplomacy and building bridges. So I think that's why older people in the church and more experienced people, I don't care if you're Baptist, Methodist, Adventist, whatever, we need to nurture the creative people. We need to give them some space to move. We need to, and the best administrators do that. The best administrators give space and say, yeah, try it. If it doesn't work, that's okay. We'll try something else.
Yeah.
So we need to be less critical and we need to pray more.
Yeah. And protective and seeing the abilities and the strengths that these creative people can bring to a broader organisation and to a congregation.
Exactly.
As well.
Yeah. In the Adventist history, when HMS Richards began Voice of Prophecy, religious programming on the radio, he got plenty of criticism.
Wow.
That's a secular medium. Why are you going to be telling the Adventist message in a secular medium? Faith for Today, first television broadcasting by the Adventist Church. I mean, they were there in New York City on a NBC4 affiliate, and basically they copied the talk show programming of the day. So they had skits, they had music, they had guests, etc. Man, can you imagine the criticism they got?
Exactly.
But the Adventists, we realized that this is a medium that can be used to build God's kingdom.
Excellent points. Well, so far in today's program, we've looked at why creativity is important, we've looked at biblical reasons for it, how to make creative ideas stick, and also some historical examples, and how to navigate through the criticism that's involved when we are being creative. Coming up after the break, we're going to be exploring some contemporary ideas that are in use today of how people are implementing creative ideas in their churches and in their local contexts. Stay right with us. We'll be right back with more of Ministry in Motion. Welcome back to Ministry in Motion. Today's topic, creativity in ministry. And so far, Gary, in today's program, we've looked at why creativity is important, biblical foundations and biblical examples of it. We've also looked at examples of creativity in history and how to navigate through the criticism that inevitably comes when people are creative. Now, have you got some examples for us of contemporary things that are happening in the here and now in local churches or in local communities where people are doing wonderfully creative things and making an impact?
Right. Where we see creativity in the church is at the cutting edge of mission. Now, what I mean by that is, if you're in a church that is focused mainly on the comfort of the church members and having a nice service on Sabbath or Sunday, then you're not going to see a whole lot of creativity there. Where you see the creativity is in those churches that want to get engaged in the community in some way, or those Christians who are planting new congregations. So, for example, in my work in the Office of Adventist Mission, we help sponsor what we call Global Mission Pioneers. These pioneers are lay people, they're not trained pastors.
They're volunteers.
Volunteers, they receive a very basic stipend, living stipend, which is enough to rent a room somewhere and have food on the table. But their task is to go into a new area and start a new congregation. So how do you do that? Well, I've had the privilege of meeting hundreds of these pioneers, and I've found hundreds of different ways that they've done it. I remember meeting one pioneer whose method was teaching agriculture to the people, agricultural principles, how to grow your crops better. I met one pioneer who was working in an area of people where it was illegal to share the Christian faith. So he became a clothes salesperson, selling clothes, but he did it in a creative way because he did it on the installment plan. That meant he would go from home to home. It's okay, you don't have to pay it all now. I'll come back next week to get the next. And so over a period of weeks, he was mingling in their homes every week, selling clothes, but obviously also making friends. I've seen pioneers teaching English as a second language. I've seen pioneers, there was even one pioneer teaching martial arts
Wow.
I mean, just a whole range of things. So that's one area where I see the creativity. And in the West, we see church planters who take seriously Christ's method, where you go, where first of all you go, you don't expect people to come to you, you go and you mingle in the community and find out what their needs are. So some people are doing things like they're starting community gardens. Some are providing coaching for kids who need extra tutoring in different subjects. Just a whole different range of basically finding out what are the needs of the community and how can we help connect to those needs.
You know, this word need seems to be so significant. Helping people grow better crops, more effective crops, clothing, communication with language, education of children. It seems to be, need seems to be the foundational thing, and finding a creative way of helping people with those needs and building relationships with them.
Exactly right. And too often, Anthony, we assume we know what the needs are. So it's important that we take time to actually find out what those needs are. And that means we need to be in the community. We need to look carefully, like the Apostle Paul did when he was in Athens. He said, I looked carefully. What are people spending their time doing? What are they worrying about? What keeps them awake at night? Why? Who do they worship? Because even if they're not believers, they worship something. And so we understand the community.
And just thinking of those big urban cities, you mentioned Athens of the New Testament era, but today we have these big cities and the issues that people are encountering in those big cities. What are some creative examples that people are using in those big, active, vibrant cities that are just loaded with people?
One I like is a couple of young people in the United Kingdom came up with the idea of we want to somehow share the concept of Sabbath with people. And so
Sabbath being a rest, that's the essential stop, rest. That's
exactly
the essential meaning of Sabbath.
Exactly. And so they went to IKEA, they bought a sofa. They put it in a van, drove into the heart of London. They didn't ask permission. They just went in there. They put this in a thoroughfare where there are hundreds of people coming back and forth, busy London. Put a sign up. Basically said, feeling tired? Take a seat. Just held up the cardboard sign. Well, so one of them would sit there and people would just come just for the novelty of it, would sit down.
Just
Yeah.
relax on the sofa.
Relax on the sofa. And they just found people would just open up. Just amazingly, that people would just, my work is just so stressful. And the other thing is they'd have a camera there recording it. And nobody seemed to be fazed that they were being recorded. In fact, some of them kind of enjoyed the fact, my work's killing me. And then right at the end, the young guy would just say, how would you feel if every week there was a 24-hour period where you could just turn off your work, turn off all these things, etc., and just relax and be and spend time with your family?
Wow.
And they looked at him and they'd say things like, "Oh, that would just be fantastic." And then he'd say, "Well, did you know that for hundreds and hundreds of years there have been Jewish people who have da 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 da?" And so when I was in United Kingdom last year, these guys, I was up in Wales, they did exactly the same thing. They put a sofa there in the city that we were in, and they said, "Gary, you sit down there," and they put the sign up the back. It was just amazing. I mean, I'm sitting there, and this lady comes and sits down, and she turns out to be a major player in the city advocating for homeless people. And she just unloads to me about the town council and the problems she's having and how she's ready to give up and she's stressed. I've just met her 2 minutes ago. Then another young lady comes and sits down, and she starts telling me about, she's got a teenage kid and how the teenage kid is driving her crazy, and just unloads to me. And I'm just thinking, talk about mingling and an opportunity to show sympathy. Now, these young people are clever because they've now connected it with a Facebook site, with social media. So every week they're posting up something about the Sabbath, and they even have a countdown. It's Tuesday, but Sabbath is coming, etc., etc. And what they're trying to do now is have little cards that they hand out to these people so that they can follow up. So it has the Facebook site, etc., etc. So they're still connected with the idea.
Yeah. Okay, so there's creativity there, and it's needs-based as well.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Very important.
Gary, thanks so much for being a guest on
My
Ministry
pleasure.
in Motion. We'll have to have you back again
Thank you.
sometime.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on Ministry in Motion today as well. Whether you're a pastor, an elder or a congregational leader, Ministry in Motion is for you. If you'd like to explore any program that we've broadcast so far on the Hope Channel, you can visit our website, ministryinmotion.tv. There you'll find an archive, a complete archive of every program that's ever been broadcast. You can view those archives 24/7, whenever you like, whenever it's convenient for you. I know many pastors are using these as training programs in their local congregations as well. But as we close, I'd like to thank you once again for joining us on Ministry in Motion. Today's topic has been creativity in ministry. We hope you'll join us next time on Ministry in Motion. But until then, may God richly bless you and your ministry.